Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. The Ukrainian parliament has reversed a controversial bill limiting the independence of anti-corruption bodies. We'll have more on that in a moment, but first let's take a look at the latest headlines. Lukashenko readies the country for war, Belarusian opposition claims. Poland cracks down on tax evasion. And anti-government protests continue in Serbia. Ukraine's parliament has adopted a new law reversing last week's regulations concerning the country's anti-corruption bodies. Today's vote was closely followed by protesters who gathered in the capital to put pressure on MPs and ensure Ukraine stays on its pro-European path. We're joined now by our correspondent Oskar in Kiev. Hello, Oz. So how are Ukrainians reacting to this new old law, and is this the end of President Zelensky's troubles?
Well, that is the big question. That remains to be seen. Certainly after the announcement of the bill last week, after the government effectively announced a U-turn that would be coming this week in Parliament, the protests died down a little. They did continue in smaller number, and indeed there were protesters gathered today awaiting the results of this. Now, some of those protesters will have had their concerns alleviated by this move, but some will still be skeptical. So it remains to be seen how Zelensky moves forward from this position onwards. One thing is sure, is that the protesters themselves will feel that they have had some impact on the proceedings of government by demonstrating, and that will resonate with the Ukrainian society, particularly in a time where they can't have elections. Now, President Zelensky thanked the Rada for passing this bill. Let's take a listen to the statement that he published shortly after that vote passed.
I want to thank all the members of parliament for passing my bill, now officially a law. I have just signed the document and its text will be published immediately. This is a guarantee of the proper independent functioning of our state's anti-corruption bodies and all law enforcement agencies. This is the right decision. 331 deputies supported it. It passed exactly as needed, both in the first reading and as a whole. It is very important that the state listens to public opinion. Ukraine is a democracy, without any doubt.
So Zelensky there himself referencing public opinion and making sure the government listens to it. Another important fact about this vote was it was the first live-streamed Rada vote since the full-scale invasion. So the government really seeing transparency as being important on this particular topic. So it remains to be seen how things will go for Zelensky domestically over the coming days. But we'll be sure to keep you updated right here on TVP World. Back to you in the studio.
It was Oskar reporting from Kiev. Thank you very much, Os, and of course, stay safe. Volodymyr Zelenskyy has survived the biggest political storm of his presidential term yet, but his public image seems bruised after a week-long protest that led to the withdrawal of a controversial bill limiting the independence of anti-corruption bodies in Ukraine. Randy Potts reports.
In what was the first live-stream vote in Ukraine's parliament since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, 331 legislators voted on Monday to restore the independence of Ukraine's two primary anti-corruption agencies. Soon after Monday's controversial vote, and after a week of local Kiev protests and criticism from European leaders, including Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, President Zelensky signed the new law reversing course. The controversy, which concluded in last week's dramatic vote, began on July 22nd when the Ukrainian parliament passed draft law number 12414. Even though the legislation severely hobbled Ukraine's two most prominent anti-corruption agencies, President Zelensky signed the legislation on the same day, disregarding both Ukrainian outrage and EU warnings. Protests against this legislation sprang up immediately, both in Kiev and throughout Ukraine. On Monday, demonstrators continued to gather outside the Mariinsky Palace, the presidential residence, and Ukraine's parliament.
I am here now to show my public position, first of all against this law, because we cannot eat this shit year after year, every day. People simply have to run out of patience at some point, and it has run out. That's why I'm here.
Outside parliament, protesters sang the Ukrainian national anthem.
My main reason here is to ensure that the president signs the draft law restoring the independence of NABU and SAPO. This has been publicly stated and the issue is scheduled for consideration. Therefore, I believe it's necessary to be here.
The new legislation was not just controversial outside parliament. Inside, a member of Zelenskyy's own party announced he was leaving the party because of the new law.
I am leaving the Servant of the People parliamentary faction. This is my reaction to last week's vote. There are many questions about the work of NABU and SAPO, but it was the creation of an anti-corruption infrastructure that was the main result of the Euromaidan revolution.
Statements by both opponents and supporters of last week's reform, as well as a physical altercation among a group of lawmakers, preceded the July 31st vote in the parliament. As the Ukrainian parliament voted live on camera inside, protesters outside watched and cheered the new vote. Zelenskyy quickly signed the legislation. For TVP World, this is Randy Potts.
Celebration with a side of criticism. This was the response from European Commission heavyweights following Ukraine Parliament's support for returning power to the country's two leading anti-corruption institutions. But is Ukraine's path to EU accession still sure-footed? More on this from our EU correspondent Angela Skudgens in Brussels.
After a week of browbeating from senior EU officials, Ukraine is finally back in the good books of the European Commission. The European Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Kos, was first to welcome the news on Thursday that that bill had sailed through Ukrainian parliament with enough votes to restore the powers to Ukraine's two key anti-corruption institutions. European Council President Antonio Costa also offered his praise on social media platform X. This was echoed by the head of the EU executive, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen herself. It's important to note that at the beginning of the week, we heard the news that she had made contact with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy herself, demanding an explanation as to why he put his name to that bill last week, and she inferred that this endangered Ukraine's bid to join the European Union. This is something that Ukrainian president started in 2022 following Russia's full-scale invasion. Let's take a listen to what the Commission president had to say on social media platform X.
President Zelenskyy's signature on the law restoring NABU and SAPO independence is a welcome step. Ukraine's rule of law and anti-corruption reforms should continue. They remain essential for Ukraine's progress on the European path. The EU will continue to support these efforts.
Now, a spokesperson from the European Commission clarified to reporters what these future anti-corruption efforts need to look like. He stated that this would comprise of appointing 4 international vetted judges to head up the Constitutional Court, as well as appointing someone to steer the Ukrainian Security Bureau, among a range of other issues. Speaking of money withheld from Ukraine due to anti-corruption issues, we know that the war-torn country only applied for €3 billion as part of the Ukraine facility, money dispersed by the European Union for reconstruction efforts in that country as it weathers another year of Russian invasion. It could have applied for €4.5 billion, but it acknowledged that it hasn't hit the necessary anti-corruption benchmarks to garner all of that cash. But we know European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen stated earlier this year that she wants Ukraine to join the 27-member strong club by the end of the decade. It is certainly now up to that Ukrainian president to see if he can commit to these reforms while also repelling the might of Moscow. Angela Skudgens from Brussels for TVP World.
At least 13 people, including 1 child, have died in Russia's overnight attack on Kyiv. The Ukrainian Interior Ministry said 132 others were wounded in the strike. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, Russia launched over 300 drones and 8 missiles Over 100 buildings were damaged in the strike, including schools, preschools, apartments and other civilian infrastructure. The Interior Ministry of Ukraine said search and rescue operations are still being carried out. Among the wounded are at least 14 children. The Belarusian opposition has raised the alarm that the Lukashenko regime is preparing the country for a potential war with the West. Not only is it spending large sums on military purposes, but it's also adopting a new law allowing it to attack other countries. Kazimierz Łysiak spoke with Belarusian activists in Warsaw on Thursday and has this next report.
Members of the Belarusian democratic opposition have announced here in Warsaw that the regime of Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus has just introduced a new legislation which would allow the country to launch preventive attacks on foreign territories.
These documents state that Belarus, for the first time, can officially send its troops abroad to support its allies. It's a departure from the policy of neutrality.
Belarus has also sharply increased its military spending by 32% just this year. But while it's definitely a warning sign, it's very unlikely that the country would invade on its own.
I don't think that Belarus's Lukashenko is ready to attack any country simultaneously. He can be a supporter, he can be an ally of Russian Federation in its strategy to initiate a war in future with NATO or neighboring countries.
Belarus is a de facto puppet state of Russia, heavily repressing any democratic opposition. In 2022, it allowed Russian troops to launch an attack on Ukraine from its territory, effectively joining the war. Now, Minsk and Moscow are preparing for another escalation.
According to all assessments in NATO and the United States, Russia and China will be ready for a confrontation on a global scale as early as 2027.
Belarus is also holding robust military exercises with Russia this fall, dubbed Zapad 2025, meaning West 2025. All these warning signs are precisely the reason why NATO countries are now committed to spending more on defense.
From the Polish point of view, it is absolutely crucial that the billions of euros that we want to allocate to defense, both Polish taxpayer money and European money, are used in the most efficient way.
This urgency is also the result of crucial information provided by democratic activists like Paweł Latuszko. And even death threats from the Belarusian regime aren't enough to bring him down.
I receive more than 150 threats. I'm receiving it every day or several days per week, but it's changed my position. I want to see Belarus a free, democratic, independent European state without political prisoners and without political repressions.
For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
No one likes paying taxes, but we all know that it needs to be done at some point. Even tax evaders will have to face the truth sooner or later. At Thursday's press conference, Poland's Finance and Economy Minister Andrzej Domański announced plans to clamp down on foreign corporations and their tax evading practices. Jan Kennedy brings us more.
After taking the helm at the newly established Ministry of Finance and Economy, former Finance Minister Andrzej Domański wasted no time getting to work. One of his top priorities, boosting state revenues by ensuring that multinational corporations pay their fair share of taxes.
Polish companies and taxpayers have the right to fair competition in the market. We know very well that the aggressive use of transfer pricing distorts that competition.
According to the Tax Justice Network, transfer pricing is a technique used by multinational corporations to shift profits out of the countries where they operate and into tax havens. The technique involves a multinational selling itself goods and services at an artificially high price, and the scale of the issue in Poland is quite significant. According to the ministry, in 2024 alone, undeclared income that companies attempted to shift abroad using transfer pricing nearly doubled compared to 2023, amounting to some 190 billion euros. And in the first half of 2025, tax underpayments from such practices were already 30% higher than in the whole of 2023. And the government is eager to crack down on these practices.
The Ministry of Finance would like to increase interest, or we may expect it will in more detail look into the settlements between related entities, especially in cross-border transactions, in order to find any discrepancies.
The government's effort will consist of 4 pillars, including creating a competence centre in Kraków for transit pricing and tax planning oversight, as well as a task force to investigate tax avoidance and recommend legislative changes.
We want to create something like a vaccine, a system so resilient that it discourages aggressive tax planning in the first place. But we also need an antibiotic, which comes in the form of audits and the work of our new competence.
The issue of international corporations evading taxes in Poland has been flagged recently by Rafał Brzoska, one of the richest men in the country, who accused foreign competitors of his parcel delivery company of not paying all the taxes that are due in the country. While experts see fighting these practices as a real challenge, based on past similar endeavours, they are full of hope that the government's task force will put up a good fight.
It's a very good move. So we have similar task group in the Ministry of Finance dealing with the APA, advanced pricing agreements applications, and this cooperation is very efficient and very good.
To curb aggressive tax optimization, Poland has already adopted one of the solutions, so-called global minimum tax on international companies. For TVP World, Jan Kennedy.
Despite Poland tightening its borders against illegal migration, human trafficking is a growing problem. The most vulnerable group, however, are not those smuggled into Poland, but people who have entered the country legally, only to become victims of modern-day slavery. John Todd has this report.
Targeting human traffickers. Poland's crackdown on people smuggling is gathering pace. A government spokesperson revealed 2 weeks ago that a trafficking gang was among those deported from the country. Experts say it's difficult to fully assess the true number of victims.
They say it's about like few thousand or maybe dozen thousands of people. But the problem is also to assessing, because a lot of people never reach us, never claim, because they are scared to claim for their rights.
Spanish police in late 2023 cracked down on an international operation that funneled unsuspecting victims through Poland. Experts say those in Poland are often forced into labour, recruited by shady work agencies offering false promises of big wages.
We also have people who took big loans to come to Poland and start work and earn money for their families. And they come here, are cheated, not earn money, but have a debt.
The majority of people trafficked into Poland are from Colombia, Guatemala and Venezuela. When promised papers are never provided, their stay can become illegal, trapping them in an exploitative situation. The US State Department last year advanced Poland to the group of countries that most efficiently tackle human trafficking. Experts warn, though, there are too few prosecutions.
Sometimes they decide to go back to their countries. Sometimes they are afraid, sometimes they are ashamed and say, no, I'm not going to go to the court.
While Poland has temporarily tightened its borders and pursues human smugglers, there are still victims and plenty more work to do. John Todd for TVP World.
Anti-government protests continue in Serbia, with students organising a march tonight to commemorate the victims of the Novi Sad canopy collapse. Although demonstrations have rocked the country for the last 9 months, neither the government and President Vučić nor the protesters want to back down. Natalia Komarov reports on the latest from Belgrade.
Civil unrest continues in Serbia, where citizens are demanding far-reaching reforms. This week, the country's student-led movement planned multiple events nationwide to increase pressure on the government.
Not only students, but people and citizens all over Serbia are demonstrating for rule of law and independent institutions.
In Belgrade, a massive commemorative march is underway to mark 9 months since the tragic collapse of a newly renovated canopy at the Novi Sad railway station. 16 people died in the incident, and so the march will conclude with 16 minutes of silence. In Novi Sad, protesters have been gathering since the early morning as the city council convened to vote on a proposal to erect a monument commemorating victims of last year's canopy collapse. Many believe the move to be too little, too late. Meanwhile, a wave of protests broke out earlier this week in the city of Novi Pazar after a student blockade was forcibly removed from the campus grounds.
Every few days we have some kind of incident where we see the abuse of police for the needs of a political party, as we saw in Novi Pazar. Also, we see actually a very strong disregard for university autonomy, because you know that police cannot enter an academic institution without explicit allowance of the university governance.
President Vučić said that it was the university authorities who made the decision to ensure that classes could be conducted normally.
The institution cannot truly be called a university if it's a den and if order is not upheld. And it really was a proper den, just like some faculties in Belgrade and the Student Cultural Center, which looked more like a pigsty than a cultural institution.
As Serbia's protest movement enters its 10th month, there is still no sign of it dying out. But the country's leadership clearly does not intend to step down and make way for the much-needed reforms. Who will come out victorious, only time will tell. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
And we're back to our main topic of the day. Ukraine Parliament reversing a controversial law limiting the independence of anti-corruption bodies. And to discuss it, we're joined by Stephen Moore, founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project. Good evening.
Great to be with you.
So, first of all, in what light does this latest turmoil surrounding anti-corruption agencies put President Zelenskyy? Well, he only backed down after thousands have taken to the streets to protest against his reforms.
Well, I think that the main thing to notice here is that Ukraine is a functioning democracy. People protested in the street, and the president responded to public opinion. And I got to say, I lived through the Black Lives Matter protests in Washington, D.C. a few years back. And the people there, like spray painted stuff. They tore down things, and, they set buildings on fire. And look at these people on your screen right now. They're not setting any things on fire. I was there at the protest last night. People were not walking on the grass. People had respect for the grass. And so the peaceful protests, really peaceful protests here, have been changing public opinion, changing public policy. And I would also point out that these are things that do not happen in Russia.
Well, okay, we're talking about protesters, but what about MPs? When President Zelenskyy wanted to change the law, all of his party's MPs voted in favor. Now that he changes it back, all his MPs follow his call too. So what does it tell us about the standards of democracy in Ukraine? And are the MPs even aware of what they're voting for?
Well, I used to work in Congress. This is the way it works. When the president from your party wants something, they use all manner of leverage and manipulation to try to get you to vote for the things they want you to vote for. It's happening in the U.S. Congress right now. It's happening in Ukraine. I don't spend much time looking at the Polish parliament, but I imagine there's someone called a whip whose job it is to make sure that members of the Polish parliament vote the way that leadership wants them to. So, listen, I get it. You'd like to see some of these people stand up and say, this is nonsense. We need to keep these anti-corruption bodies independent. But you can also understand this is part of a functioning parliament for this to happen.
Well, at least one MP left the presidential party. Now, will this new old law be enough to appease the angry Europeans and Americans as well, who are questioning the nature of Ukraine's struggle against corruption?
Yeah, well, that is the in my view, strictly from a public opinion in America point of view, the damage has been done. This is just the Russian propaganda has been saying for a long time that Zelensky's corrupt, and it's all been false. But Americans, particularly Republicans, believe it because this is just the propaganda channel that it goes through. And now Zelensky has offered them proof that by saying that he is doing away with the independence of these anti-corruption bureaus. So it is not good messaging. It's not helpful in any way, shape, or form. And you've got Andriy Yermak, who is President Zelensky's chief of staff and very powerful. Some call him a co-president. And he recently said in a Politico article that is not his goal to understand the way American politics works. And I thought that was showed a lot of strength of character for someone to talk in public about his shortcomings, because someone around Zelensky needs to have a very in-depth understanding of U.S. politics. That is, if they want to get weapons from America. If the weapons are not important, they can do whatever they want. But if it is important for Ukraine to get weapons from America and Europe, then there's certain things they need to do, which is maintain anti-corruption institutions.
You talk about weapons. Well, not only have thousands of people gathered in Kyiv, despite ongoing Russian aerial attacks, but also soldiers. We had soldiers, right, in our report, express their anger at president's actions. So what would be the consequences of the army losing faith in its political leadership?
Yeah, there's a bunch of guys that have been on the front for a long time. They're tired, they're mean, they're trained to kill, and they need to be able to have faith in the civilian leadership that's leading them in this war. So, it is it's a tense time right now because the Russia is not doing well. But that's also because, there's a lot of Russians dying to take a very small amount of land here in Ukraine. But it's taken its toll on Ukraine as well. And so I don't think it was super good for morale for this to happen right now.
And meanwhile, the whole anti-corruption turmoil apart, Donald Trump has entered a social media dispute with Russia's former president, Medvedev, a person whose opinions are usually taken with a pinch of salt, to be delicate here. Now, does it mean that the U.S. president
Depends on how much he's drinking.
Takes seriously the Russian propaganda threatening Washington with a nuclear conflict?
Well, I think the cool thing about this is that Donald Trump is engaging and understanding just how lacking in desire for peace the Russian government is. There is no one there that wants to lay down their weapons. No one there that wants to stop short of anything of taking all of Ukraine and Poland and the Baltic states and whatever else they can take and get their hands on. So the more that, I think President Trump had the experience of dealing with a Putin during his first term who was less damaged than Putin is now, because by all accounts, Putin spent a lot of time being deathly afraid of COVID, spending a lot of time in the old Russian archives and figuring out reasons why he could be the next Peter the Great. And that's the Putin that Trump is dealing with now. And the more that he becomes familiar with that Putin, the better off, that Ukraine is, that Poland is, and America and the rest of the world is.
Well, so Donald Trump seems pretty much resolved to put new tariffs on countries buying fossil fuels from Russia. Now, what would be the consequences of such a move? Russians claim they are immune to any sort of actions, but what about Kremlin's friends?
Yeah, Russia is a gas station with an army. And if you cut off the gas station, the army's got to figure out something else to do. And I think it's great. I think, we have known for years that there's a shadow fleet of Russian tankers that are flagged illegally under other countries that go take Russian oil out into the Indian Ocean and give it to India and China at prices that exceed the cap made by the sanctions. So we've known this for years. No one's done anything to stop it. So if we can stop the flow of Russian oil out of Russia, and more importantly, the flow of those oil revenues back into Russia, it slows down Russia's war machine, and it makes the world a safer place.
Stephen Moore, founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much.
Macha, great to be with you, man.
Thank you. And thank you for watching, and stay with us for much more here on TV.